We're here on the top of Daf Tzadi Gimel, and we are up to line 5. Upliga de Rav Nachman. Now, before we start this Gemara, let's just point out that we were discussing the issue of Davar Shelo Bali Olam. And we had a case of Konam Shani Osa Leficha. A woman declares a Konam for her malacha that her husband should not benefit from her malacha at all. And the word Konam means carbon. It's a bastardization of the word carbon, and it's called konam. And just like a konam is also bana, meaning a carbon, so too all the malacha that I do and all my produce should be also bana, like a carbon to my husband. And we established the machlokas here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Akiva. The Tanakama is of the opinion that the neder, the konam, is not chal at all, because we're talking about a davar shelo bali olam. I mean, she hasn't yet done that malach. She hasn't created that product. Rabbi Akiva says no, it's a valid neder. And why is that? Because of something called shema ta'adif olam. Yosem in Arod. And we said, I think this was the last thing we did at the end of last week, that if, let's say, there's a certain shear of tzemer, we're going to give a case of wool, and that's what she's required to produce within the framework of the ksuba of the marriage. If she goes beyond that kitzvah, that set amount that Chachamim determined that she has to produce, then that becomes hers. She doesn't have to give it to her husband, and she can therefore generate a konam on that hadafa, that extra amount of tzemer that she produced. But in any event, it comes out that according to Rabbi Akiva, we validate a neder for futures, for something that hasn't yet come into the world. Meaning, as far as the sheer kotzev is concerned, the neder is certainly invalid, because a neder or konam cannot be mafkia shibud. She has a monetary shibud for X amount of wool. However, Rabbi Akiva says that the neder could be valid if she would produce beyond that which she's required in the framework of marriage. Which is called Shema Tadif Olah. And on that she had no shibud. So the principle that you can't take a neder to prohibit someone from something that's not yours, but rather belongs to him, right? I can't take a neder that you won't be able to enjoy your table. I can only prohibit you from my table. So that which is kitzvah, that the Rabbana required her to produce of tzemer, that on that there's clearly no neder, because it can't be mafkir the shibud. But beyond that kitzvah, Rabbi Akiva says the neder is valid. How could the neder be valid? It's a davar shelo bali olam. Is muchach shesover Rabbi Akiva she'adam makne davar shelo bali olam. That you can't create a neder, or for that matter, a kinyan, on futures, on something that is not yet in the world. But that's not really true. we cannot really derive any conclusions about Rabbi Akiva because of the statement of Rav Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua, in which the sheet of Rabbi Akiva is being reinterpreted. It's not a Davar Shalom Bolio. What's the scenario? But Omeres Yiktishu Yadai Lo Seyen, or Yikadshu Yain Lo Yadi Lo Seyen. The Yadayim Isnu Be'al. The Yadayim exist in the world. And she's saying to her husband, Konam, that you won't enjoy the benefit of my Yadayim. And that's called Ye'asru Yadai Olech, or Yiktishu Yadai Lo Seyan. In that case, we're not talking about a Davar Shalom Aliolam. Her Yadayim are in the world. And the Konam is going to be Chal vis-a-vis Hayodayim, that the Baal will be enjoined from getting any benefits from Hayodayim. We have a similar case called Dekel Liperot. If I sell you a Dekel, but only for the purpose of owning the fruits of the Dekel, that's a valid kinyan. So, for example, if I own a tree and I say, Konam Peros Elon Ze Alecha, or Beficha, that would be valid. What does that mean, valid? How can you take a neder, a konam, on something that doesn't exist yet? The true, with all due respect, the tree has not produced anything at all. But the answer is that he's selling the decal. He's not selling the peros. If he were to sell the peros, that's futures, that's Davar Shalom Aliyom. But he's selling the decal liperosim. I'm only giving you the tree with rights to own its peros. But that's a kinyan in the guf ha'etz. The elon itself is Connington. That's the Davar Shalom Aliyom. Now, let's see if we can remind ourselves, back on Tzadi Beis on Beis, with the story of Rabbi Yana. Remember the story of Rabbi Yana? Where a man says, Hareh Ukudeshes li, to a Yevamot Ashuk, Lichshe Yachlotz. And the Mishnah Kiddush said it's not valid. And the Gemara wanted to prove something from this. The Gemara wanted to prove from this Rav Shita that ain't Kiddushin Tovsim be Yevamot Ashuk. And since right now the Kiddushin cannot be valid, because right now she's Yevamot Ashuk, therefore it's basically a Kiddushin for futures as a Davar Shalom Aliyom. Meaning anything that you cannot effectuate a kinyan now, but only later when something's going to change, that should be a Davar Shalom Aliyom. We have a proof, says Rabbi Yanai, from a Mishnah in Kiddushin to the sheet of Rav that Ein Kiddushin Tovsin be Yevamot Ashuk. So the Gemara says that doesn't really prove much because that reflects the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva validates a neder, a kona, on Maisi Yadai Shani Osa in the future, meaning that Rabbi Akiva is the one who holds that Adam Makti Dover Shalom Boliolam. Now, let's introduce Rabbi Akiva, who holds Ein Kedusha Tovsin B'chayvei Lavin. And Yevamot Shuk is Chayvei Lavin. So the case of Areach Mekudeshes Li Achar Sheyachlotz Lo Lich Yevimtech is a case of Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'chayvei Lavin, according to Rabbi Akiva. If you want to prove Rav sheet that Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'Yevamot L'Shuk, you can't prove it from that Mishnah, which reflects the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, that Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'chayvei Lavin. We don't accept Rabbi Akiva, and therefore we would have argued that Yevamot L'Shuk fits under the category of Chayvei Lavin, and therefore Kedushin should be Tovsin. What's your proof that Rav is correct that Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'Yevamot L'Shuk? So then the Gemara says, wait a minute, you don't have any right to interpret the Mishnah in Kedushin like according to Rabbi Akiva. And the reason why the Kedushin are invalid is because Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'chayvei Lavin. You can't say that. Because Rabbi Akiva is the one who says, Adam Makti Dover Shalom Boliolam. Which means that Rabbi Akiva would validate a Kinyan like Kedushin Li'achar the language Li'achar Sheyachol Tzloch Yivamech. So the Gemara answers no. Rabbi Akiva never went as far as to say that Adam Makli Dover Shalom Boliolam. In the case of the neder, he validated the neder because she declared Kona Maisi Yadai Le'osein. Which is like Dekel Leperos, as we said before. So again, we have Rav Huna, Braid Rabbi Yoshua. He's interpreting that Rabbi Akiva holds Ein Adam Makni Dover Shalom Boliolam, and the validation of the neder on the part of Rabbi Akiva is based on a different svara, in a case where she said Yikodshu Yadai Le'osei. The Gemara earlier had assumed that according to Rabbi Akiva, Adam Makni Dover Shalom Boliolam, and therefore the Kedushin of futures, Liachar Yevamech, Yachlot Tzloch Yevamech, would be a valid Kedushin according to Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, Pliga de Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. That this interpretation of Rav Huna of the validation of the neder according to Rabbi Akiva is contested by Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. The Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Huna kirav, the Rav kirabi Yanai, Rabbi Yanai kirabi Chia. Let's see, we have a whole Chagadia. Let's go. Rav Huna kirav, Rav kirabi Yanai, Rabbi Yanai kirabi Chia, Rabbi Chia kirebi. The Rebbe kirabi Meir, Rabbi Meir kirabi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Eliezer ben Yaakov kirabi Akiva. The Omer ta'odom makne davar shelo boli. We see that we do have a tradition attributed to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that Rabbi Akiva holds we can validate a kinyan in a shalom boliol. And now the Gemara is going to go through each one of these Amoroim, each one of and Tanoim actually mentioned here in this entire chain of Huna Maihi, the Itmar, Amocher Peros Bekel, Lechaverim, so what's the status of Mocher Peros Bekel? Is it valid or not? Does Allah recognize that kinyan or not? Amar Rav Huna, Ad shelo bo li olam, yachal lachzer. Mishabo li olam ein yachal lachzer. So it seems quite clear that Rav Huna holds that Adam Makne Tovit Shelo Bo li olam. He may have a zchus chazara, and that zchus chazara is granted to him until the pears are actually produced. Once the pears have grown, then Eino Yochel Lachzer Bo. We see that there's a machir that's valid on peros Rav Nachman Omar, Af Mishaboli Olam Yochel Lachzer Bo. I don't know why he needs chazara. If he's holding Eino Makne Davar Shelo Bo li olam, why? Could be that the original kinyan continues to be chal until the peros. I mean, the Masechet Kinyan is still valid, and it'll only become a chalos kinyan when the peros grow on the trees. But then how can he be choser bo after the? I'll read to you what he says. He says, "Kevin shlohoyu aperis ba'olam b'shasha asa ma'asek lochal kinyono is ein hu chal l'kshiyovo aperis liolam." I don't understand the word laxar, but let me just see if he says anything in the footnote. You have a note by any chance? No. What does he mean? I'm just going to take a stab at it. What he means by Yochel Lachzerbo is that there's something called tacit approval. If he doesn't reject the Kinyan, then the Kinyan becomes valid automatically. But I still am not satisfied, because how could the Kinyan become valid automatically when the Kinyan was made before the Paris came into the world? I'm going to take a wild stab at this. Maybe it means Mishaboli Olam. If he made another Kinyan, Mishaboli Olam. Ain't no Yochel Lachzerbo. The Chiddush is that even though the pears haven't been fully developed, but they're budding on the trees, he can sell those pears. Of Nachman Omar, Af Mishaboli Olam Yochel Lachzerbo. Now, why can't he make? Why isn't this Kinyan Chal? So maybe what he's saying with Nachman is that since the pears haven't matured yet, he can't sell them. You know, the Mach Dov Shalom Oliol. He just writes here, Kevan Shalo Hayu Aporis Peros Ba'olam B'Shas B'Shasha Asa Maisa Kinyan. Therefore, Lochal Kinyan. Yenu Chal Shiyova Peros Liolam. So he's not learning the way I learned it, that there's a new Kinyan being made. He's saying there's only one Kinyan, when it was certainly a Dov Shalom Oliolam. Rav Huna seems to be saying that you can sell something that's a Dov Shalom Oliolam. Just that he can be choser. Omar Rav Nachman, Modina di Shomit v'ochal lo mafkina minu. In other words, I'm going to accept Rav Huna if the Lokeach grabs onto the peros and the mocher was not yet choser bo. If he consumes the peros, then the seller has no claim or compensation. And that's based on the principle of mechila b'to shmei mechila. Wow. Now we're getting into a whole nother sugya like of Gneva. Know what I mean? No, the Lokech had no right to take the peros, but he took the peros. And now there could be a mechila on the peros if the Bailim did not make a big deal about it. They'd make a protest. Okay, so this is where we'll stop. We're gonna have to go over this a few times. It's a big sugya, like a kind of a shas. Okay.